I 32M never expected to be ambushed by my own family like this. It was just another lazy Sunday afternoon when my brother 35M and sister-in-law 33F asked to come over for coffee. Little did I know they had an ulterior motive that would leave me speechless. As we settled into the living room with steaming mugs, I noticed an unusual tension in the air. My brother kept fidgeting with his wedding ring, while my Sil couldn't seem to meet my eyes. Something was clearly up. "So, what's going on?" I finally asked, breaking the awkward silence. They exchanged a meaningful glance before my Sil took a deep breath and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "We've been trying to have a baby for years now," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But after countless tests and treatments, we've discovered that, well, my husband can't father children." I blinked, surprised by this intimate revelation. "I'm so sorry," I said, unsure of how else to respond. "That must be really tough for you both." My brother nodded grimly. "It's been hard, but we've come up with a solution. That's actually why we're here today." A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. Where was this going? My Sil leaned forward, her eyes shining with a desperate sort of hope. "We were hoping, well, we were wondering if you'd consider being our sperm donor." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I nearly choked on my coffee, coughing and spluttering as I tried to process what I'd just heard. "You want me to what?" I finally managed to gasp out. "We know it's a lot to ask," my brother said quickly. "But think about it. This way, the baby would still be biologically related to both of our families. It's the closest we can get to having our own child." I stared at them in disbelief, waiting for someone to crack a smile and say it was all an elaborate joke. But their expressions remained deadly serious. "You can't be serious," I said, shaking my head. "Do you have any idea how weird that would be? How complicated?" "We've thought it through," my Sil insisted. "We'd keep it a secret, of course. The child would never have to know. You wouldn't have any parental responsibilities or obligations. We just need your genetic material." The casual way she said it made my skin crawl. I stood up abruptly, needing to put some physical distance between us. "This is insane," I said, pacing the room. "Have you considered adoption? Or using an anonymous donor?" "We have," my brother replied. "But this feels like the best solution for us. Please, just think about it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The very idea of it made me deeply uncomfortable on so many levels. How could I possibly look at their child, my biological offspring, and pretend to just be good old uncle? "I'm sorry, but there's no way I can do this," I said firmly. "It's just too weird, too complicated. I don't want to risk messing up our family dynamic like that." My Sil's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. My brother wrapped an arm around her, looking at me with a mixture of disappointment and frustration. "I thought you'd understand," he said quietly. "This is our last chance at having a family." His words stung, but I stood my ground. "I do understand how much this means to you, but you're asking way too much. There are other options out there." The conversation devolved into tense silence, broken only by my Sil's muffled sobs. I felt terrible, but I knew I was making the right choice. This wasn't a decision to be made lightly, and the potential fallout could be disastrous. Finally, they gathered their things to leave. As they headed for the door, my brother turned to me with a haunted look in his eyes. "Just promise me you'll think about it," he said. "Please, you're our last hope." I nodded noncommittally, knowing in my heart that my answer wouldn't change. As I closed the door behind them, I let out a long, shaky breath. How had a simple Sunday afternoon turned into this surreal nightmare? Over the next few weeks, the tension between us was palpable. Family dinners became an awkward affair, with meaningful glances and hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. I tried to act normal, but the weight of their unspoken request hung heavy in the air. My parents, oblivious to the real issue, kept asking why everyone seemed so on edge lately. I dodged their questions, not wanting to betray my brother and SIL's confidence. But keeping this secret was eating me up inside. I found myself lying awake at night, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if I agreed and the child somehow found out the truth? What if my future partner wasn't okay with the arrangement? What if, God forbid, something happened to my brother and Sil? Would I suddenly be responsible for raising my own biological child? The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I'd made the right choice. But that didn't make it any easier to bear the disappointed looks from my brother or the tear-filled glances from my sill. About a month after their initial request, I received a text from my brother asking to meet for a drink. My stomach churned with anxiety, but I agreed. We met at our usual pub, the familiar surroundings a stark contrast to the weirdness of our situation. As we nursed our beers in silence, I could see the internal struggle playing out on my brother's face. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "We never should have put you in that position. It wasn't fair." Relief washed over me. "Thank you," I replied. "I'm sorry too. I know how much this means to you both." He nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "We were desperate, but we've had some time to think, and you were right. It would have been too complicated, too risky." I reached out and squeezed his shoulder, feeling the tension between us finally start to dissipate. "So what will you do now?" I asked cautiously. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "We've decided to look into adoption. It won't be easy, but it feels right." We spent the next hour talking through their plans, the conversation flowing more freely than it had in weeks. As we parted ways that night, I felt like I finally had my brother back. In the months that followed, I watched as my brother and Sil threw themselves into the adoption process with renewed hope and energy. It wasn't an easy road. There were setbacks and disappointments along the way. But seeing the joy on their faces when they were finally matched with a baby girl made it all worth it. The day they brought her home, I held my niece for the first time and felt a surge of love I never expected. Looking into her tiny face, I knew without a doubt that biology didn't matter. She was family, pure and simple. As I handed her back to my beaming SIL, our eyes met. In that moment, I saw gratitude, understanding, and a silent acknowledgement of the rocky path that had led us here. No words were needed. That night, as I drove home from the impromptu family celebration, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange journey we'd been through. What had started as an impossible request had ultimately brought us closer together as a family. And while the road ahead might not be perfect, I knew we'd face whatever challenges came our way, together. In the end, I realized that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that lead us exactly where we're meant to be. And as I pictured my brother and Seal cuddled up with their new daughter, I knew that everything had worked out exactly as it should.